Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to break down some really deep ideas about what happens after this life, all based on a fascinating theological text. We're going to explore what forgiveness actually is and how the work we do in our lives is, ultimately looked at.
So let's just start with a phrase we've all heard a million times. Forgive and forget. But what if that's completely wrong? What if forgiveness has almost nothing to do with forgetting? What if it's not really an emotion at all, but something way more decisive and, honestly, way more powerful?
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at a pretty radical reframing of what forgiveness is. Then, we'll bust a few common myths about it. And after that, we're going to pivot to what happens when our life's work gets judged by a fire that shows what it's really made of. Okay, let's dive right into this first big idea. The source text we're looking at frames forgiveness not as some vague feeling, but as a really clear-cut act, almost like a legal or a business transaction. It's about closing the books on a debt. So the source text points us to this key Greek word, aphiemi. And it turns out this word was used all the time in law and commerce. It literally means to cancel a debt that someone legitimately owes you. It's a conscious choice. Basically, when you forgive, you're the one who absorbs the loss.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because this chart gives us a visual for a famous parable, the one about the unforgiving servant. You've got a king who forgives a servant a completely insane, astronomical debt. That's the giant bar. But then that same servant turns right around and refuses to forgive a tiny, insignificant debt someone owes him. You can barely even see that second bar.
Get this. The source actually does the math, and the ratio between those two debts is something like 600,000 to 1. Now, that number is supposed to sound impossible. It's designed to shock you, to drive home one single point. The scale of the debt we've been forgiven is so massive that it just dwarfs any wrong that anyone could ever do to us.
So here's the bottom line, right? According to this text, if you can truly wrap your head around the sheer size of your own forgiveness, it fundamentally changes your ability to hold a grudge. That little thing you're angry about, that offense somebody committed against you, that is the 100 pence. The shift in perspective is meant to be absolute.
All right, so that's what forgiveness is. But let's pivot for a second, because it's just as important to talk about what it isn't. And according to the source, a lot of these myths, we believe, can actually cause a ton of harm.
See, according to the source material, we get this wrong a lot. And it lays out 4 really common but pretty damaging ways we misunderstand what it means to forgive. We really need to untangle these if we're going to get this right.
First, and this one is so critical, forgiving someone does not mean you're saying, oh, what you did was okay, or that it didn't matter. Not at all. It just means you are making a conscious choice not to demand personal payment for it. The wrong is still wrong. You just decide to cancel the debt that you are owed personally.
Next up, forgiveness does not mean you get amnesia. It doesn't mean you have to pretend it never happened, because there are still consequences. The source gives the example of King David. He was forgiven for some terrible sins, but he still had to live with the incredibly painful real-world consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. Forgiveness cancels the personal debt. It doesn't just rewrite the past.
Okay, number 3. Forgiving someone does not obligate you to immediately trust them again or put yourself back into a harmful situation. Think about it. Canceling a debt is one thing, but giving that person a new line of credit is something else entirely. Setting up wise boundaries to protect yourself, that's not a lack of forgiveness, that's just wisdom. Trust has to be earned back over time.
And last one, forgiveness isn't some get-out-of-jail-free card for someone to just keep doing the same thing over and over. The source is really clear on this. True forgiveness is always connected to the idea that the person needs to turn away from that behavior. It's a release from a past debt, not a license for them to cause future harm.
Okay, this is where we make a really big pivot in this whole discussion. The source we're examining argues that the New Testament actually talks about 2 totally different future judgments for 2 different groups of people. And if you mix them up, things get really confusing.
And this illustrates the difference perfectly. First, you've got the Bema seat. This is only for believers, and the question here isn't about salvation. That's already settled. The question is about the quality of their life's work and whether or not it earns a reward. Then you have the Great White Throne. This is for unbelievers, and this is where their eternal destiny is determined. 2 very different things.
So if a believer's life is going to be evaluated, what's the standard? Well, the source uses this incredibly powerful metaphor from the book of 1 Corinthians, a fire. A fire that tests the quality of everything we've built.
So the idea here is that everything we do, literally every action, every word, everything we've built on the foundation of our faith is one day going to pass through this revealing fire. Now, this fire doesn't harm the person, but it absolutely reveals the true substance of their life's work.
And this table just lays it all out, nice and clear. On one side, you have work built with stuff that burns easily. Think wood, hay, and stubble. The source says this represents things we do for the wrong reasons, for our own reputation, out of selfish ambition, or maybe even fear. They might look impressive to people now, but in the fire, they just burn away. And that means a loss of reward. But then, on the other side, you've got the good stuff. Work built with durable materials, motivated by truth, faith, and love. This is your gold, silver, and precious stones. This stuff doesn't just survive the fire, it's actually refined by it. And that's what gets rewarded.
So, wow, that's a pretty heavy idea, right? So how are we supposed to live with that knowledge? Well, the source text argues for a balanced faith, one that avoids two really dangerous extremes, by holding two different sets of scripture in tension with each other.
So on one side, you've got these really serious warnings about the danger of falling away. They're there to stop you from getting lazy or arrogant, to guard against presumption. But then, on the other side, you have these incredible promises about God's security and His power to hold on to His people. Those are there to guard you against despair. It's holding those two things together, that tension. That's what creates a strong, steady faith that doesn't quit.
And that really brings us to the final takeaway here. This isn't just some abstract theology for someday in the future. It's a direct challenge for today. The opportunity to choose our building materials, the stuff that burns up, or the stuff that lasts, that opportunity is right now in everything we do. So the real question is, what are you building with?